your first journey into the inner sanctum, the new bedroom, basically. Kind of small. Basically, bed, closet, dresser. No real room to do anything. 2 shelving units. Boom. Considerably smaller than what I used to have. But again, bigger room out there. Anyways, onwards to what we're talking about here. That is UFC 202. Currently enjoying some PC Blue Menu deluxe macaroni. The cheese sauce is a bit crappy, but the pasta is good. Get this camera down a little bit more. Okay. So this is the Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor 2 card, which is, of course, a very big deal. It's a massive deal. This is one of the biggest fights of the year. The supporting staff of this card is not great. I mean, yes, we have Anthony Rumble Johnson, Glover Teixeira, very legitimate co-main event, but we're also looking at main card fights between Hai Gui Lim and Mike Perry and Tim Meads and Sabab Homasi. And then on the lower portion of the card, like, I'm really looking forward to Mizugaki versus Garbrandt, but... Oh, and I'm really looking forward to Magny versus Larkin. That's a fantastic Fight Pass headliner. But the card as a whole is not great. And usually when you see that, you're like, injuries, obviously. Except that, I don't know, a lot of these fights that, like a lot, not really, not particularly injury plagued. Like, even in its original, quote, best form, this card wasn't tremendously exciting outside of the main event and the co-main. That being said, the main event and the co-main probably make up the actual worth of paying money to see the pay-per-view. So, I guess that's the logic you can use. Starting at the bottom, working our way up, Alberto Uda versus Marvin Vettori, going with Uda, decision. Colby Covington, Max Griffin, going with Covington by submission. I'm going to say he finishes him. Neil Magny versus Lorenz Larkin. Okay, this is the first fight I'm going to get depth here because this one is interesting. Neil Magny has had a pretty improbable run when we think about his time on The Ultimate Fighter. He really wasn't expected to be kind of like, frankly, a ranked guy. A guy who's now beaten Hector Lombard, Kelvin Gastelum, Eric Silva, Hai Gui Lim, who we mentioned is on the main card. William Maccaro is another fight that I probably didn't expect him to win. I didn't think he beat Alex Garcia. I didn't think he beat Tim Means. My track record of picking Neil Magny fights is garbage. I thought he would lose a lot of what he's won. Ironically, I thought he would beat like Seth Brzezinski, and he lost that fight. So it has worked both ways. In this fight, I'm giving the edge to Larkin because what Larkin historically has struggled with is people who utilize a lot of takedowns, press a very serious pace, or have incredibly good boxing. Not really any of that, like, really describes Magny. I mean, he pushes a good pace. He has takedowns. He has boxing. But his style of fighter, like, as much as I think Magny is probably the better fighter, like, if I were to list these are the top 15 dudes in the weight class, who on this list does Magny beat? The number is probably higher than Lorenz Larkin. But in terms of, like, the specific matchup, things that Larkin has historically had problems with are not really present in Magny. So I'm going to go with Larkin by decision, but it should be a good fight. Or an interesting fight. Not necessarily, like, one that, like, you want to show non-fight fans. It's like, this is why you should become a fight fan. But it is one that, like, I think hardcore fight fans are going to really enjoy the technical and tactical display that's going to be on display here. Randa Marcos versus Courtney Casey. Randa Marcos is the better fighter and should win, but has a historical tendency to make fights a lot more difficult for herself than she has to. Looking specifically at a recent fight with Jocelyn Jones-Lybarger is a good example of that. Even her fight with Jessica Penne to a certain extent. I'm going to go with her by decision, but it wouldn't surprise me if she fights not tactically sound and loses this fight. Artem Lobov versus Chris Avila. I don't really know Chris Avila well, but there's not really anyone I can pick Artem Lobov against. Lobov's hope is I'm going to keep my hands kind of low. They're really heavy, and if I stort you with a shot, you're going down. I mean, he has the one-punch KO power at featherweight that is very rare. He just doesn't have anything else. Like, he's not a particularly good striker He's his wrestling and ground game are pretty damn subpar, to be honest. He didn't get submitted in the Ultimate Fighter finale by Ryan Hall, but that's largely because something that has to be mentioned is that not getting submitted if you have a basic concept of ground game isn't actually that difficult. If you're basically admitting, I'm not going to grapple with you, I'm just going to defend. I'm not going to try to sweep. I'm not going to try to prepare positions. I'm just not going to get tapped, and you can do that, but you can't win a fight that way. And that's kind of what Lobov did. He just did not leave any openings, and then he had I believe he fought Alex White after that, and then lost that fight as well. And hell, Alex White, who is a stupid aggressive striker, was like, I'm just going to take you down and put you on your back, and you're not going to do anything. And it worked. Raquel Pennington, Elizabeth Phillips, going with Rocky Pennington by decision. Not super interested in the fight, although Raquel Pennington has been kind of growing on me as a fighter that I do enjoy watching fight. I just don't necessarily enjoy her opponents, I guess, if that makes any sense. Cody Garbrandt versus Mizugaki. I'm going with Garbrandt in this fight to win by TKO. Mizugaki, to me, is a very diminished version of himself. And it's not surprising. I mean, we're talking about a 32-year-old bantamweight who has, 32 fights under his belt. I mean, we're talking about when he should be invading. Like, this is not surprising. His last 3 fights went over George Roop, another horribly fading guy. Losses to Aljamain Sterling and Dominic Cruz. You could say that, he did beat a Francisco Rivera who has some similarities to Cody Garbrandt, but is a very poor man's version of Cody Garbrandt. You could say Eric Perez, I guess, to a certain extent as well. But as much as Mizugaki is still a guy who definitely has something, it's not enough to stop the rise of Garbrandt, who I wasn't a huge believer in prior to his fight with Thomas Almeida. I thought that, frankly, I just hadn't been impressed. I hadn't really been impressed. And it was also, I think his attitude kind of rubs me the wrong way, because he was the one going out there saying, who has Thomas Almeida beat? What guys has he beaten when Cody Garbrandt up until that point, his biggest win was Marcus Brimage, I guess. And then Almeida had, yes, he was possibly losing to Brad Pickett, but he had beaten Brad Pickett, Yusha Boy, Anthony Burchak. Like, all of these are bigger wins than Brimage, if we're being blunt. Garbrandt, I always thought was more the protected guy. Maybe that's just why. Maybe this may be a case of the attitude's getting in the way of me appreciating the skills. But he's a good boxer. His wrestling is on point. He has some of the hallmarks of an alpha male fighter in the sense of scrambles and wrestling and so on. And he has greater striking than you usually get because, of course, he's more naturally a boxer than the guys from that gym usually are. He probably will be able to TKO Mizugaki, who is a very, very tough guy and a very well-rounded fighter. I just think that at this point is kind of physically in the deteriorating stage of the phase where he's a little bit too slow to compete with the young guns coming up, because Bantamweight's got some exciting prospects coming through the pipe. Tim Means versus Sabab Hamasi. I'm going with Tim Means to win a decision. I'm going with Haigwin Lim to TKO Mike Perry. It's never good when I'm glossing over main pay-per-view card fights. Rick Story versus Donald Cerrone. I'm going with Rick Story, and it's not going to be a popular pick, I don't think. And my problem is that when we think about this, Rick Story recently fought Tarek Safadine, who is not Donald Cerrone, to be clear, but presents a lot of similar problems to Donald Cerrone, a kickboxer who is strong in the clinch, has the ability to stop takedowns, has some grappling skills and so on, but is like a properly sized welterweight. Cerrone's fighting, Cerrone is not a huge lightweight by any means. He's kind of, he's good sized at lightweight, and he's fighting kind of the money weight system. I'll fight anywhere, kind of thing. And I appreciate that, don't get me wrong, but he's going to be smaller than Rick Story. Rick Story's a bully in the clinch. With his wrestling, his takedown ability, he should be able to get some takedowns. He should avoid getting submitted. Like Rick Story's historical problems are with people who come in and actually try to take him down and are like good wrestlers in their own right. He's kind of one of those classic examples of the idea that a D1 wrestler isn't necessarily that hard to take down. He's, good takedowns offensively don't necessarily equal good defensive takedowns. For examples of that, see his fight with Charlie Brenneman, see his fight with John Hathaway, see his fight with, he won it, but see his fight with Brian Foster, see his fight with, and actually he kind of proved also this with Johnny Hendricks early on in his career when Story out wrestled Hendricks. But you can also see his fight with Calvin Gastelum. Anyways, going on and on and on. Like his historical problem has not been fighters really that are like Donald Cerrone. I mean, I guess you could argue Mike Pyle, but Mike Pyle only really won the fight by hurting him. And Mike Pyle, I think, hits harder than Cerrone. I'm not like relative to size. I think Cerrone is like the knockout artist at lightweight, but much more so than Pyle is at welterweight. But I think like if Pyle can hurt you, it doesn't necessarily say Cerrone can. But it's been guys like, and then I guess you could say Martin Campen, but like Demian Maia, Charlie Brenneman, John Hathaway, Kelvin Gastelum, guys who are gonna really take Story out of his element and be proactive in terms of forcing clinches and getting to the ground. Cerrone's not that guy. It wouldn't surprise me to see Cerrone get a knockout or a submission here, but I'm picking Story by decision. Maybe that's going to be unpopular. Rumble Johnson, Glover Teixeira, going with Rumble Johnson by TKO. Faster, more dynamic, more explosive. Like Glover's just kind of slow. Makes up for it with massive punching power and good technique and very tough and very good at finding a game plan also outside of the Phil Davis fight and of course John Jones, who I just don't think he has a game plan for. But Rumble Johnson, super athlete. Again, with the exception of basically John Jones or a Daniel Cormier or a rematch with Alexander Gustafsson, there's just not really anyone I'm picking Rumble Johnson to lose to at this point. There's some prospects in the way of like a Misha Serkinov or something who could materialize into something. I'm very high on Misha Serkinov, if anyone hasn't picked that up. But right now, Teixeira should get TKO'd here. Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, I see it going the same way as the first one. Keep in mind, I picked Conor McGregor to win the first one, and he made me eat crow. And the reasons that I picked him then, I think, are still applicable. I think he does have a lot of the skills that Diaz brothers have historically struggled with. Kicking game, the ability to vary up their striking, the ability to use footwork. He just didn't do it. And the way he's talking is he doesn't seem to realize what went wrong the first time. It's, I just won't get tired this time. Everyone gets fired fighting that way against Diaz brothers. You can't approach a Nate Diaz fight thinking, oh well, okay, so if I precise strike in there with power, speed, and so on, I will knock him out. When has that worked against Diaz brother? They don't. They just aren't normal human beings. They're I kind of come off as a Diaz brother hater because I keep talking about how simple I think the game plan is to beat them, but very few fighters actually present the one or two ways I think that you do beat them, and even the ones that don't do it. They keep they play by what I call Stockton rules, and you don't win against the Diaz brother under Stockton rules. So Diaz probably submits him again. So, kind of hoping I'm wrong because I feel, I don't even know if I'm hoping I'm wrong. But I'm not a fan of either of these guys, and I do think that their stardom is based on something that's not necessarily sustainable. You kind of see with Conor McGregor wanting a lot of money that the UFC's not generally willing to do, maybe with new ownership. They are. And Nate Diaz is not willing to do a lot of the things that kind of go with the territory of being a big star, such as dealing with the media, staying off the weed would probably help because that's still a problem. And sort of being slightly politically correct, I guess. I mean, I guess people love the politically incorrect fighter, but there's a limit to how far that can go, I guess. What I'm saying? I don't know. I feel like these two are good for certain elements of the sport, but not necessarily good for some of the long-term health of the sport, I guess. Maybe I'm just a grouch who hates both these guys. I don't know. I'm going to enjoy the fight. I enjoy their fights. I just don't necessarily enjoy the. Never been a big fan of the trash talk promotion, I guess. That's all. I would say the fight card is worth the pay-per-view cost just for those last two fights I talked about alone. But I don't know, like the below that, the 3 fights on the main card below that are just so bad. I mean, like if you promote Garbrandt, Mizugaki, and Larkin Magny to the main card, I don't know, maybe you got something, but then you have a really, really, really weak Fox Sports and Fight Pass card. I guess not Fight Pass. I mean, you'd have Colby Covington on the Fight Pass, which is still a pretty big star for Fight Pass standards. Yeah. Anyways, that's what I got, and I'll be back for the next card.